So we are coming to almost to end of our this foundation course. We have one more session to go. Uh, Today we are going to hear more about are we doing proper end of life care, and when we have studied in our medical colleges, we have seen that many people are dying and they are taken care of in a particular way. All of us will maybe we will be doing CPR, putting oxygen, giving hydrocortisone, and things like that. So, in a chronically ill patient who are progressively deteriorating and becoming end of life, so are we doing right thing? So, is that what we have studied during our medical school days? Is it correct? We will hear more about this from Rajagopal sir. Um, he doesn't need any introduction. He is the chairman of Pallium India and director of Trivandrum Institute of Palliative Sciences. So, sir, it's over to you.
Thank you, Sunil. Thank you, Raju. Hello, everybody. Sunil just now said that you are nearing the end of the course. I'm going to speak to you as your patient for tomorrow. Any one of you may be my treating healthcare professional. Hi, Mohit. Thank you. And I want you to think about what you would like to do for me. Someday, when I am very ill, I am not asking about the hospital policy. If you are the one to decide about my future treatment, at a time when I am very ill, if you are reasonably certain, I'll accept that no human being can be 100% certain because there are always imponderables. If you are reasonably certain that I have a disease that is not really curable, that I am likely to worsen and to die. In that situation, if you are my treating doctor, I want you to think and tell me whether you would consider it your duty to keep my heart beating for a few more days, if necessary on a ventilator. Let us say it may be maybe ALS, motor neuron disease, or advanced cancer. I'm giving you two scenarios. In one of those reasons, in one of those situations, you consider it your duty to keep me alive. That means my heart beating, even if I am not functional and bound to a bed, hardly able to function as a human being, but maybe still conscious. In that situation, will you consider it your duty to keep my heart beating for a few more days? If necessary, on artificial life support measures, including possibly a ventilator. Will you respond by chat? Priya says no. Okay. Sakshi, thank you. No. Dr. Juvaria, no. Okay. Mohit, no. Okay, now that 4 or 5 no's have come, even if somebody wants to yes say yes, it's unlikely that that response will come in now. Majority wins. Thank you very much. Okay, Neelima would discuss with my family. That's a very, very practical thing to do, because if you, yes, Priya, my life is likely to be miserable. But if Neelima, you do something for my benefit, if that's against the family's wish, you will go by what my family will say, right? Suppose, I mean, no, it's not me, it's Neelima who is complicating the issue. I had given a simple question, and you had all agreed to not to make me miserable. But Neelima is bringing up the family. Okay. I am telling you, I can't enjoy life like this. Life is absolutely miserable. Don't do all these infusions. Stop your interventions. Allow me to go. And suppose my son and my wife are telling you, look, you can't just allow him to die. You have to do something. We don't mind the cost. Even if it's expensive, it's okay. We will find the money. Just keep him. I mean, want our my father, my husband. That's what they will say. We won't need him. Please keep him alive. Okay, Neelima. So Neelima will do something for to please my family, to abide by their wish, even if that is something that is causing me more suffering. Right, Neelima? Yes, Neelima, it's a sensitive and delicate issue, but having said that, Neelima, this is practical, because when I am gone, I will not go to court. But living family may go to court. They will be angry with you if you do not do what they say. So I will accept by Neelima's argument that in a practical world, very often, well-meaning doctors, even when you know that this is bad for me, you are only making my misery more prolonged. You are stretching out my difficult dying process. You may be forced to go by what the family says. Agreed. Everybody else, I agree. You don't want to do this, but what Neelima says is practical. Family, you can counsel. Okay. Uh, Counseling goes on. I am on a ventilator suffering while your counseling is going on. And finally, they say, let me ask our uncle. And it gets postponed by a day. Yes, I know emotions are involved. It's hard to make a decision. Okay, let us now bring it back one step simpler. This question is particularly to Neelima. Leave the family alone. The family is saying, we trust you, Dr. Neelima. You do the whatever is right for him. Neelima, if the family's issue was not there, you were doing it for me. What would be your decision?
Can I speak, sir?
Yes, Neelima. Louder, please. I cannot hear you.
Can you hear me, sir?
Yeah, I can.
Sir, again, if we had a discussion before the patient was put on a ventilator and he said unequivocally, I don't want to suffer. I don't want to be on a ventilator. Again, personally, I would find it, I'm speaking very honestly and truthfully, I would find it very hard to take someone off a ventilator or not do anything to maintain life, because I think our instincts, even though the patient may be suffering, our instincts are to maintain life. It may not be the right decision, but I guess our instincts, that's where maybe we need some more knowledge. I don't know. I would find it hard personally.
Neelima, thank you
Honestly.
for being frank. Even when the majority was not giving your opinion, thank you for being frank. This is one of the things that we'll talk about today. At least everybody else who said a different opinion, let us recognize Dr. Juvaria, Priya, Sachi, Mohit, everybody. Please note that Neelima is bringing up a real issue. And we owe it to Neelima. Thank you, Neelima, for being frank. And I am sharing the screen where the Indian Council of Medical Research position paper of 2018 is given here, where the doctor's duty of care is defined. Neelima, particularly to you, you may be bound by the social realities, legal issues, family issues, very difficult, but at least let us accept that this is our ethical responsibility. This is our ethical responsibility for you to mitigate suffering. I'll accept every other complication. But Neelima and everybody else, I hope you will acknowledge this primary duty of any healthcare provider. Your primary duty is to mitigate suffering, certainly cure when possible, relieve the physical discomfort, and comfort me always. If, when you know that you cannot cure me, and you cannot even relieve my suffering at that point of time, leave alone comforting me, you are adding on more suffering to me, you have to accept that that is ethically wrong. There will be no, I guarantee, no statement anywhere in your textbooks, medicine. Where do you read ethics? In forensic medicine, wherever you read it, your textbook of medical ethics, you will not find a statement that you have a duty to prolong life at any cost. I am sure you will not find that sentence anywhere. I know that today's medical profession does that, but that is not your ethical responsibility. Your ethical responsibility is what is seen on the screen, and Indian Council of Medical Research adds, there exist no exceptions to this rule. I totally agree that you and I may not be able to fulfill our ethical responsibilities sometimes, because what is ethical may be illegal. What is ethical may not be permitted by the family. What is ethical may not be permitted by the society. But at least let us make this point clear. When I am in that bed, your ethical responsibility is to mitigate my suffering. You also have to accept that death is the inevitable consequence of life. You cannot ward off death forever. That science has not evolved yet. I am making a statement. You do not have a duty to prolong life at all costs. No ethics book will tell you that you have it. A couple of days more of heartbeat on a ventilator means a couple of days more of suffering for the person and for the family at an enormous cost. So this physical, social, and psychological, spiritual suffering has to be mitigated. Okay, would you like to read that? Just read that. I don't have to read it out. His mother was dying. Parthasarathi Shom, a well-known financial advisor to Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, wrote this in the Business Standard. Even on Everybody told him, your mother is dying. She was elderly. And he found that on the last day, she found a doctor drawing a blood sample. He asked why we are doing the LFT. Why? Please read. This does not make sense. So, what I would like you to do, if the family is agreeable, I'll tell you about the family later. The family is agreeable. And if you accept this ethical responsibility to do the best for me, you should be start thinking, does this man, poor man, really need those statins even now? His BP now, though he was a hypertensive, but now it is 100 by 60. Why am I still pushing that beta blocker in? And why am I still doing the blood checks? What is the relevance of that serum sodium? If you do the serum sodium, you will find it low. I am challenging everyone to die with a normal serum sodium unless it's a sudden death. When your bodily functions come down, your cells lose energy availability, ATP level is low, sodium pump will fail, sodium will get more intracellular, and serum sodium will drop. It's part of the dying process. And in somebody clearly dying, checking that serum sodium and pushing in that hypertonic saline, which causes more of vascular reaction and thrombophlebitis and causes me more pain, doesn't make sense. And anyway, you have seen these people, both arms and both legs swollen with phlebitis. What we do, what Dr. Sunil does in a situation like that, is to avoid intravenous lines as much as possible. I know it's very convenient for us to have IV lines. When we feel like pushing this in or pushing that in, we can push it in. But it causes me suffering. And then somebody has to hold my hand so that the vein is not lost. My independence comes down by 500%. What we could do, if I badly need those fluids, often a dying person may not need any more fluids. But if I do, if I am dehydrated and that's giving me fever and discomfort, then give it by the subcutaneous route. I may still need the morphine, but that can come in by the rectal route or subcutaneous route. That will be so less painful, causing suffering. The point is this: an IV line that you take for granted, routine use, in this context, is something that does not have any meaning except infliction of suffering. So you have to think from my point of view. How can you make Rajagopal more comfortable? You should be asking, how is he? Not what's the BP. When I am dying, on my last day, my BP is of no consequence. Please don't wake me up just to check the BP. And I may not have slept all up night. And at 5 o'clock, I finally sleep. And 5:30, somebody comes, hey, open your mouth, checking the temperature, taking my temperature, pulse, and respiration and the BP. Pointless. Instead, be soft and ask, how is he? Is he resting? And even the 2 hourly change of posture that they would do in a good hospital, maybe at this time on my last day, you can make it 4 hourly. You can check my skin. I shouldn't get pressure sore even on my last few days, but balance that. If I have not slept for all that night, I need a few hours sleep. You can postpone that by 2 hours. and consider putting me on a pressure relieving mattress so that you can now change my position less frequently. Okay, anybody from what I have said so far, any question I have not finished by any means, but any question or comment from what I have said so far? Would you like to uh, ask me? Chat, Raju. If chat questions come and I do not notice it, will you tell me?
Sure, sir. I will tell you.
No comment? Shall I go on? I may seem unconscious, but looking unconscious doesn't mean that I cannot hear anything. Repeatedly, people have come out with this comment saying that after a stroke, they lie unconscious for weeks together, nobody telling them what was happening. It happened to a friend of mine. 3 weeks he couldn't speak. Nobody thought of giving him a pad or pen. With his own hand, he could have written. He didn't think of asking for it either. And nobody ever told him what was happening. 3 weeks, a man was lying there, unable to express anything. What do you lose? Please keep talking to me. Ask me how you are, even if I cannot respond. And before you turn me to a side, please tell me, Uncle, we are going to turn you around. Please, you are going to turn you to the other side. And we are going to check your blood pressure, whatever you are doing. And doctors, we are at a stage. I may need you to be physically comfortable. I may need your help. If I am in pain, if I have any breathlessness, I need you. I need you to do the right thing to make me comfortable. But please remember, I need my family. I need my family. Once you have made me comfortable, till then you are what I want. But once you have made me comfortable, I want my family. There are so many things at that point of time. I would want to maybe heal some past wounds. I may say, please, I want to see my brother whom I have not talked to in the last 3 years because we quarreled. This may be the most important thing for me. And in between, I may be panic in my dreams, nightmares. I may want my son to hang on to. And this happens again and again and again, modern times. Any one of you who is able to think about your own death, please remember this. This is horror. Today, people, if with any money in the pocket, die in ICUs. And they want to ask to see their grandchildren, they are not allowed to. A young man or young woman dying in an ICU asked to see their only child, not allowed to. And for the child's emotional well being, the most important thing is that there should be closure. A child of 5 years and above can understand that, or at least 6 years and above can understand that death is permanent. You think you are protecting the child by not disclosing the truth to them, but they need to see the mother or the father or the grandfather. They need to hear them say that they are loved very much. They need to be able to say the goodbye. They need to have the final hug. That is so very important for their emotional well-being. And this is not only a personal opinion. Repeatedly, people have worked about it and written about it. So, most important that the children should be allowed to have closure. And if the dying person is a child, again, they need to know. Uh, uh, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. How many people have heard about Elizabeth Kubler-Ross? The death and dying lady, that's what she was called, who was the first person in the world to study dying as a science. She tells a story of a child to whom the mother and father were keeping the diagnosis from, eventually told that the child had leukemia. And uh, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, her treating doctor, told the child, eventually, in answer to his question, yes, I think you are dying. And the child said, uh, how long do I have? Elizabeth Kubler-Ross says, I don't know that. But why did you ask? There is something that I have to do. Dr. Ross, will you come with me to my home with my parents? Dr. Kubler-Ross was understandably reluctant. She was a busy person. And the boy said, Dr. Ross, it will not take more than 10 minutes. Do please come. So they took the child to his home. The child went in, asked the dad to take the new bicycle out of the garage. There was a bicycle that was fixed to the wall because the child, it was bought for the child as a birthday gift, but he was never well enough to ride it. The bicycle was brought down. The child climbed on it and cycled around the driveway. And then he said, Dr. Ross, please stay here. Make sure that my dad and mom do not interfere. Then he called his younger brother and gifted the bicycle to the younger brother. I know I won't ride it again. Let him have it. That was his closure. That was his healthy closure. That's the kind of truth that children demand. Not always easy, but when you deal with them as individuals, you arrive at these beautiful moments. And of course, religious rites have to be facilitated. This can be very important and sometimes challenged. I remember a situation where an intensive care unit was not allowing a priest to go in for the last communion. The person was dying and was shut up in an ICU, and even a last communion was denied to him. That's the horrible face of pointless medical practice. Will you read this excerpt from an article? When the arms and legs are tied up, so that I do not pull out my nasogastric tube, which you used to feed me with stuff that my body is rejecting, or when you tie me up for permitting the intravenous line to go, you are your action amounts to assault and battery on a defenseless human being. It is pointless and it is cruel. What I need, what that man, 84-year-old man, needed that time was a hug from Sindhu. he needed to hear from Sindhu, "Dad, I love you." But Sindhu was afraid. Please read what is on the screen. Do you know what Sindhu is talking about, the isolated segments? The hepatologist is saying that no, don't stop the infusion because his liver needs to be perfused. The nephrologist wants to do this. The cardiologist wants to do this. The helpless daughter doesn't know what to do. Neelima, I think the woman in the first picture, she was at a poor people's home in Trivandrum city. We had to pay the bus fare to his daughter so that she could afford to come and visit. But she died with those few drops of water down the throat. She was a woman who was separate from the family and lived in the poor home. But I think she was 100 times luckier than that wealthy man, tied up, connected to numerous tubes and machines and monitors. In the context of unsalvageable life, futile and inappropriate artificial life support measures usually cause physical, psychological, social suffering to patients and families. What they should be getting is palliative care. And allowing them to go, allowing a natural death is not euthanasia. Euthanasia is the intentional act of killing a terminally ill patient. Killing. It is killing. On voluntary request. For the purpose of the good of the patient. Granted. It is not with bad intentions, but it is still killing. We are not talking about it. Allowing natural death. Neelima, by disconnecting that ventilator, you are not killing the person. You are allowing the person to die a natural death. That is not euthanasia. Withdrawal of a ventilator is not euthanasia. In ethical circles, this has been widely discussed and very clearly allowing natural death is not euthanasia. And there is nothing called passive euthanasia. I know it appears in India's Supreme Court judgments, but this is the ethical explanation. Euthanasia cannot be passive because euthanasia is killing. Withholding or withdrawing inappropriate treatment cannot be construed as an intention to kill. I shall share this document with you, and that you see the link I have given in the bottom, and if you open it, you will get the ICMR document. Just read the executive summary, 5 pages, I think. I think it will make good reading. So, Neelima,
Sir, there are few questions.
Oh.
Suppose patient is on ventilator, should we allow the children to come in and see the patient if they are going to die? That is one. And the second one is regarding the COVID patient. The patients are in fear due to isolation. So what shall we do in such situation?
Okay, Sunil, all these questions we will come towards the end when we are at the discussion time. Okay, because some of the questions will be answered by the slides that I am going to show. So So I was actually addressing Neelima. Thank you, Sunil. Addressing Neelima. So when you think the family is agreeable, it's no problem. These are the steps for withdrawal life support. You ask, have I written an advance directive? I have. As a matter of fact, I have. I have not only written it, I have got it witnessed, I have discussed it with my wife and children. They, one of my sons initially did not want to hear about it, but I insisted, and after several discussions, he has agreed that he will not be a party to keep my heart beating at more suffering to me. So, three independent physicians should perform an evaluation to see if there's a reasonable chance for me to regain a life of reasonable quality. And of course, as Neelima said, if you and the family are on opposite sides and you start arguing, okay, let him die, they will think you are a cruel doctor. You should acknowledge. We hear what you say. We can see that you love your father so much. You want to do the best for him. I also want to do the best for him. Sit down. Let us talk about it. Give only realistic treatment options. The family may not be willing yet to withdraw the ventilator if that happens. In my case, that's unlikely to happen because we have already discussed this. But if that has not been discussed and the family needs time, they cannot take this decision on the drop of a hat. Therefore, give them some time. Don't escalate treatment. Don't now come and add the total parental nutrition. Continue existing measures till they have taken a decision. This I am saying when the family is unable to make up their minds. And if they say, okay, but please don't stop the oxygen inhalation, maybe you will have to make those compromises because we are in the real world. And this is not the time to bring in the money. Suppose at this point of time you say, look, this will only cause suffering for him. And anyway, it's going to be very expensive. One day on ventilator in the ICU is going to be 60,000 rupees a day. Then you are actually forcing my son to say, money doesn't matter, doctor, you do everything. And if you are thinking of ventilator, if you are recommending withdrawal life support, don't say there is nothing more to be done. Explain that you will continue to do everything for me to keep me comfortable. This nothing more to be done can be very, very painful for the family. They cannot take it. When you say there is nothing more to do, they cannot take it. Instead, say that's not true. There is no situation where nothing more can be done. Even when I am dead, there are still some things to be done. Say that we will do the best for him. Though we are stopping the artificial life support, we will do everything to keep him comfortable. That should be our message. The recent Supreme Court judgment does make you bound to follow my advance directives. They say if I have signed a document and name a trusted person, okay, if my son is not absent, is unavailable, I have said talk to my nephew. I deliberately said that because my wife may be, though she is agreeable, may be too emotionally affected to come and sign documents, etc. But according to the Supreme Court judgment, you, doctor, have a responsibility to abide by my wish. But there are a few catches according to Supreme Court judgment. The advance directive has to be countersigned by the judicial first class magistrate. I have not done that. I'm not going to court and wait for days together to get it signed. And the Supreme Court also ordered that a 3-member medical board in the hospital has to certify this, but also the district collector has to appoint a second medical board, and even then the judicial first-class magistrate will have to come personally, see me and certify this. Understandably, I can't call it absurd because that will be contempt of court, but this is not doable. Between March 2018 and now, that is 2.5 years, I am not aware of a single person in the whole country of 1.3 billion people who has gone through this process and got his artificial life support withdrawn. So where does that leave us? The ICMR has conducted workshops and they have brought out some documents. One, doctor's primary duty of care cannot be forgotten. What's your duty to me? To mitigate my suffering. All these legal complications, the procedures are valid only when there's a conflict between you and your team, or between your team and my family about what is the right thing. As my family has agreed, you are clear in your mind that your duty is for my well-being, then all the procedure becomes invalid. But then you should make me comfortable. If you pull the tube out, I may be gasping for breath. You have to make me comfortable. If necessary, with tiny doses of morphine. Dr. Sunil will tell you that a dose of 1.5 milligram going in subcutaneously or IV, or 3 milligrams going subcutaneously will not cause respiratory depression in me, but that will give me enough comfort, if necessary, with a tiny dose of midazolam also. And at that point of time, one of the questions was, even if I am on a ventilator, should you allow a child to come? If I want it, and if the child wants it, I strongly argue that the child should be allowed to. The child will cry. The child may have dreams about it, but that will be so much better than the child waking up in the middle of the night and saying, "Why did my grandfather abandon me? He was my best friend." Is it because he is angry with me? Is he angry with me because I was a bad boy? If he sees the ventilator, he may be afraid. He may say, "Mom, it scares me." And the mom will explain, "Look, he needs the machines now." And that's enough. Children are often braver than adults and can face facts much better. I'll stop there. 45 minutes. So now I can come back to the presentation, to the PowerPoint if necessary, but now I'll take the questions. So from the point where some questions we had answered halfway through. In India, do we ask about a preferred place of death? Steve, only palliative care people do. I don't know about your country, but here.
Sir, I am from India itself, sir, because
Okay.
you had told about BP and all. So I was just wondering if this happens when a patient is fully conscious and then is in the maybe in the ICU or something. Not you had told regarding you can change the position change, make it 4-hourly and all. So you were telling about a scenario. Was it hospital based or home care also you were thinking, you were telling, sir?
The place, Steve, that doesn't matter. What matters is, what do I want? I may be saying, Dr. Steve, take me home. Send me home. I want to go home. Don't people say this often, especially the
yes,
elderly?
yes, yes, sir.
What I'm saying is respect that. I may also say, no, 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 I don't want to go home. I am scared. I need you. Because if I get breathless again, I will choke. I need you. Let me stay here. This also happens. Now, that is me telling you. Will you ask me? I do. I do bring up that discussion, not when the person is already on the ventilator. That is not the time. The earlier, the better. Look, I am talking about me as a patient. I'm not only not afraid to talk about it, I have actually written it down. Why don't you, as my doctor, give me the choice when I want to? But the way to bring about the discussion is in those patients, unless you have discussed the diagnosis, you will not get here. Don't sometimes patients tell you, doctor, tell me whatever I have, I need to know. I want to know because there are so many things for me to do. I want to write my will. I want to go back to Bombay once and settle my affairs there and come back. People do that. And then we may allow that, but that's the opportunity. Look, you said you want to close your business in Mumbai. That means you think you will not be able to go back there. What do you think is the state of affairs now? What do you think is happening to you? They say, doctor, you and I know that I am dying. Or he may ask, doctor, am I not dying? Am I dying? And you may honestly say, look, I don't know how much time you have, but I think you are quite wise. I think if you settle your affairs, then you can enjoy the remaining time in peace. I would encourage you to settle the affairs. So that is what I will ask. And then I will say, okay, you obviously have been talking about your end. When your end does come, whether I bring up the word death depends on whether the patient brings it up. If he says, when I die, then it's better to use the simple language death. But some people culturally may not be willing to hear the word. You talk about the end of life. Where would you like that to happen? I have repeatedly asked this question, but remember, that cannot be a standalone question. That means a relationship between you and the patient. When we have built that relationship, when they are able to ask me things that they are not even able to ask the family, then we are speaking not me as a palliative care physician, it's between two human beings. And these human beings has seen many people die. And that's the experience that I am sharing with them. So I do ask, and some people say, doctor, if I go home, will you continue to treat me? And I'll ask, I won't just, it's easy to say, yes, yes, yes. But what do you mean? If he means, I said, we'll certainly look after you. But I must admit that we do not take on night calls in our unit. We do not have the manpower to do that. That's the truth. I would like to say, for you, I will come to your home. But I cannot handle that. It's better to be honest. I need to be honest and say, this is what I can do, this much I will do. Sakshi, Steve, thank you for nodding. I think you're nodding agreement. Sakshi, see, when patient we cannot understand what they are saying, that happens. We don't know what they mean. And this happens also with children. This happens with mentally ill people. This happens with people who are mute. And this happens with people who are disoriented, partially or completely. So there will be a lot of people in whom we do not know what they want. This is why the question that was brought up, I forget who, earlier. These discussions had better happen early. I am having it now with you. Sakshi, I have already told you what I want. But at that time, Sakshi, I may change my mind. I have the right to change my mind. But you will have to ask me when I can explain. And if you have not had the opportunity, and now I can't talk, understandably, you should ask my family. Ondi, please come and sit down. Tell me, has he ever expressed some wishes about his end of life? Did he ever tell you where he wants it? Have you talked about it? I may not have talked about it. Most people do not talk about it. And then, if I have never expressed a wish, even if not written, even in verbally, then you may have to ask my wife, Auntie, what would you like to do? We don't know what he wishes. What do you think he would have wished? That's the best you can do.
Yes, sir.
So, Nilima, personally, if the person is on a ventilator, we should prepare the child. Tell the child, your grandfather is connected to a lot of machines. He's bloated up a little bit. He may be scared. He may look different. Do you still want to see him? And if he says yes, take him. And he may look from afar and say, I don't want, I want to go back. That's fine. Tomorrow he may still see, I want to go back there. Edward Faisal, COVID patients, they need isolation. They are in fear. Patient becomes worse due to fear. Edward, I also want to tell you about a course that Raju and her colleague Arun and Sunil and all are running together. It's called Pali COVID Echo. It's just 5 sessions. Raju, do you know when the next course is starting? After their course finishes? It's
Sir, we will be having on from November
okay.
first week. So they have asked for this about last
Okay,
week
okay.
also. So
So
I will be sharing the details.
Monday
soon.
to Friday, specifically dealing with the COVID situation. But let me still answer your question. Uh, all your compassion and empathy must come to play. Shall I tell you some magic words which will give them some peace, a little? I see you are afraid. We are going to look after you. I'm sorry I have to wear all this. I may not be touching you now, but I am going to make sure that we'll do the best for you. How many seconds have you taken? With those words you have conveyed to the patient, oh my God, there's a human being there. I may say, doctor, doctor, doctor. I may want you to stay there. You may not be able to, but at least you have assured me that somebody cares. That's one thing. Secondly, I have read all these reports. There was even on ICU, or sorry, on COVID treating unit, where as soon as they admitted patients, they took away the mobile phones, put them in a cellophane wrapper, kept it safe to be handed over to the family when the person dies, or to hand back to the person if he recovers. What's the point? In an ICU COVID isolation ward that I envisage, there will be good sockets for charging the phone. Their mobile phone is the best treatment they have. We should encourage their interaction with the family. If they are disoriented at times and cannot handle the phone, somebody should operate internet-based communication so that they can see their loved ones. So communicate. Uh, a friend of mine and Sunil, that is Dr. Biju Raghavan. Hey, Sunil, what did Biju say about give a hug with your voice? Something like that. I don't remember the exact word. Give a hug with your voice. I am paraphrasing. With what we say, we will have to demonstrate compassion. And the communication between the patient and family is not important only for the patient. This is vitally, vitally important for the family. Raju, did we have a session on grief and bereavement?
Not a separate session, sir.
No.
We had a session on psychosocial issues as a whole.
Okay. Maybe it was briefly touched on, but there is something called pathological grief, particularly to Edward, but to everybody. The number of deaths in India from COVID is now about 1.3 lakhs, right? That means in India, there are at least 5 lakhs of people who have lost a loved one due to COVID. All these people had a loved one snatched away in an instant, never to be seen again, and not even offered a final hug to the body. And that kind of cruel, traumatic ending causes what we call pathological grief. The grief of the survivor often mean it becoming a depressive illness so that the person cannot get over the grief. So this can be reduced with your mobile phone and with the hug with your voice. Steve, you asked why did they involve this judicial first class magistrate in advance directives? The Supreme Court trusted only the judiciary. They thought they may force me, my children may force me to sign an advance directive. So to prevent abuse, they involve the judicial magistrate.
Okay. Thank you.
When there's the right time for us to, Edward, ask, hey, Sunil, time is up. 2 minutes more. Okay, I'll be fast. Time to ask advance directives to the patient and family. Edward, I have no significant comorbidity except a mild COPD. I am reasonably healthy. But I wrote my advance directives about 10 years back. The best time to do it is when you are healthy. When you are ill, your perspective may change. By all means, change it later. Actually, the best time is in your own family is to go home and talk about it. First time they will say, hey, why are you talking about these inauspicious things? But this is important. Okay, best time is when you are healthy. If not, as early as possible. When you are disclosing a bad news, you have had a session on communicating bad news. Disclosure of diagnosis and communication of bad news, not necessarily on the same day, has to be followed up with this kind of discussion. Death certificate, Ravindra, death certificate. Someone files a case, we are about to answer. I don't understand your question, Ravindra Bharati. Please unmute and speak. Sunil, in the meantime, it is 4 o'clock. Should we stop and I respond to the questions later and send it all by email?
No, sir, I think we can finish this question.
Okay. Thank you, Sunil, for giving me some more time. So, Ravindra, I hope you will clarify your question. It's not clear to me. I'm going on to Steve's question about autonomy in a child who is having an incurable disease and is about to die. Parents want to continue treatment, child wants to go home. Happens all the time, all the time, all the time. Very tricky. This situation has to be dealt with early by the oncologist or by the treating doctor, ideally. The parents, if they were ill, they would have said, stop everything, let me go. But they cannot give up the child. That's the parents' protective attitude, their child. We can't give up our children, so we force this cruelty on them. And repeatedly I see a horrible ending, whether the child is angry with the parents, stop talking to them, non-cooperation with the treatment, and still the well-meaning family keeping on forcing treatment. And if 4 oncologists refuse to give any more chemotherapy, it is because useless. They find a 5th oncologist. We should try to solve this by early discussions. I don't have time to go a lot into details, but Steve, I'll be happy to continue an email conversation if necessary about this.
Okay.
But I'll also encourage you to read Death and Dying by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Savitri, your question is, it looks hard to counsel COVID relatives. In spite of that, I have allowed their relatives to feed some to her father who was already unconscious. I was feeling happy on that part, but treatment-wise, I have counseled them. Non-invasive ventilation, denied intubation, and nasogastric feeding. Okay. People do survive after non-invasive ventilation. This COVID is a mystery even after all these months, and responses are very variable. So keeping to NIV, but I won't deny intubation to anybody. Young people have a better prognosis. If the lung condition and triage shows that intubation may be beneficial, I may still do it, but I quite see as a general rule, what you are suggesting, Savitri, seems to be a good practice.
70 years old. Already he is a known case of Parkinsonism.
How old?
Sorry, sir. 75 years old. Sir.
Savitri.
Audible, sir.
I am putting myself in that patient's.
Yes.
He is my age, and if I have Parkinsonism, I will be very grateful to you for just making me sleep. Thank you. Absolutely. And no nasogastric feeding. In somebody unconscious, nasogastric feeding is known to cause aspiration and hasten death.
Yes, sir. And one thing I was happy, I have allowed their family to feed some sweets. He asked 2 days before only. So that way I was very happy, but I was feeling little guilty feeling also.
Okay, like a patient is unconscious.
Yes.
I'm not, they needed to feed the dad.
Yes.
Putting something in the mouth, I will say he may not be able to swallow.
Correct.
Just soften the sponge and put something there. I wouldn't want to get them to see him choke and then feel guilty. Savitri also asked, sometimes I feel guilty also. COVID, to give some sweets to her father. 2 days.
It was the same thing one day.
Those sweets are some of the most beautiful things in the world that I have heard about. Because at that point of time, that favorite sweet of the old man was so precious. Yes. And thank you, Savitri, for doing that.
Thank you.
Sunil. Oh, thank you, everybody, for that wonderful discussion. Thank you for your contribution. Back to you, Sunil.
Thank you, sir. Sir Rajlakshmi, we can move on to patient story, which will be presented by Dr. Sakshi.
Can I share my screen, sir?
Sure, sir. Sure, doctor. You can share.
Is the screen visible and is my voice audible?
Yes, it is.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Sakshi. I work as a reader at Satyabama Dental College and Hospital. Before I start this case, please excuse me if there are any mistakes. This is my first case presentation in palliative care. This is about an 88 years old male patient who was diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia. He presented with a complaint of extreme weakness and unable to walk, with dizzy spells and difficulty in urination since the past 2 days. The history of presenting illness: 2 months back, the patient had complained of fever, which was persisting for a week, fatigue, shortness of breath, and blood on coughing from mouth. He was diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia. He received 4 blood transfusions with no post-transfusion complications. But later on, before his 5th transfusion, he developed a mild fever and he was refused further transfusion. He was on home palliative care. Within the next few weeks, there was progressive loss of weight, weakness, and appetite. And in the past 2 days, he was having extreme weakness, inability to walk, and dizzy spells. On examination, he was conscious, oriented, afebrile, thin-built, poorly nourished. There was pallor. His blood pressure was 110/60. The chest was clear, no icterus, cyanosis, clubbing, and pedal edema. The temperature and pulse were normal. The treatment that was given, the investigations that were done was echocardiography, which was normal. His chest X-ray had right costophrenic angle was obscured, suggestive of pleural thickening, and there were bilateral prominent vascular marking and calcific granuloma in bilateral lungs. His COVID test was negative. He was diagnosed when this COVID pandemic had started. His hemoglobin was 5.9 grams per deciliter. Platelet counts were 28,000, TLC 4,040. His blast cells were 35%, and his RBCs were predominantly normochromic macrocytic. The treatment, he was given extended phenotype matched packed RBCs of B positive blood group. So after his 4th blood transfusion, he completely refused. He did not want any other further treatment and any other hospital administration, because for every blood transfusion, he had to be admitted to the hospital, and he had the fear of hospitals. Financially, he felt that all the money would go in his treatment. And initially, his family did not tell him about the illness. They hid the fact from him and told him that he had anemia, and for that he was getting treatment. But he soon could make out that it was something which was much more serious. And after his 2nd transfusion, his daughter told him about his illness. The medications which he was on was Febutas once a day, Hexadin mouthwash after his meals, Dufalac 2 to 3 tablespoons, Ensure powder 2 scoops 3 to 4 times a day. His complete blood count was to be checked every 15 days. For his fever, he was given Calpol 650 milligrams thrice a day for 3 days. Antibiotics like Taximo 200 BD for 5 days, Acoget 100 BD for 5 days, Rabelit once a day, and Loxap 500 once at night for 5 days. So the main concern was first revealing the diagnosis and prognosis of the disease to the patient. What about his nutritional support when he was at home care? How would his wife take care of the nutritional support and the stress that both of them faced? What could be done about the acute weight loss and loss of appetite, and about some psychological support? So 88-year-old male patient with complaints of fatigue, shortness of breath, blood on coughing from his mouth for the past 1 week was diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia. He was given 4 transfusions of 2 units of blood each at periodic intervals of 15 days and within the diagnosis, and the next transfusion was scheduled after 15 days. He refused further hospital admission and then developed fever, and then there was an extensive nationwide lockdown due to COVID, and he was on palliative care at home. He developed extreme weakness, unable to walk, dizzy spells, and difficulty in urination. When he did develop fever and the family members contacted the hospital, they also told that palliative care at home would be given, because if they got him to the hospital and because of hospital rules, he would again be tested for COVID, and because of fever, he might be kept in the isolation ward, which will not be good for him. So there were arrangements which were being made for domiciliary blood transfusion at home, but unfortunately he breathed his last at home, surrounded by his wife and son. But this is what he wanted, to be at home in his last few days. The discussion point, the mean median survival for patients with acute myeloid leukemia greater than 65 years is approximately 2 months, and it worsens with age, and it is almost as low as 1 month for patients greater than 85 years. So the end of life is very, very critical in these patients. Chemotherapy is not advised, not well tolerated. I found some studies selecting these selective acting agents like tyrosine kinase inhibitors, but I think there's no proven results that they are very effective and they will act as alternative for older age group. What we need to discuss is what else could we have done in these 2 months to improve his quality of life and to decrease his general anxiety. And talking about home care versus hospital administration, very important palliative care that can be done during COVID time, and counsel the caregiver to provide support to the patient. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sakshi. So we have an 88-year-old man with AML who died within 2 months, and he received blood transfusion at home, and he was died as per his wish at home, surrounded by his wife and son. So what else can be done to improve his quality of life and to reduce his anxiety? So anybody can answer this question. Patient was able to be at home as per his wish, but what else can be done to improve the quality of his life? Anybody? You can unmute and speak.
Sir, good afternoon, sir.
Yes.
Sir, by any chance, having had explained the diagnosis as well as the prognosis, which was guarded to him at an earlier stage in the right way, so that he could have planned a bit more for the future, maybe closed a few unfinished tasks or businesses that were left, would have helped. And sir, as far as the medical point of view, since he was having a lot of difficulty in urination, which again it challenges one's dignity to some extent, so intermittent catheterization, if possible, if he had been empowered with it, would have helped slightly to some extent.
Okay, so thank you. That's very important. Discussing Dr. Sakshi, what was
Yes.
his insight regarding his illness? Did he know
Actually,
about
he is my
Yeah.
grandfather. So he, because of COVID, my mother was there. She was the one who could make out his illness, because he was fine. He was healthy before, but his sudden weight loss, and because he was coughing, she was in Lucknow and she got his test done. And when the results came, she went to Calcutta and she took him to the doctors. So they had told them against chemotherapy or any other method. They had advised palliative care for him. So initially she did not tell, but later on she first told my grandmother and discussed with him. So she did not tell him the nature that it is end of life, or he has just 2-3 months. She did tell him what it is, and in his language, to understand that it is blood cancer. And she told him that you need blood transfusion and you will need hospital administration. So she described everything. And what he had to say was that he's done everything in life. He has done what he has wanted to, and he would like to live at home, and he did not want any hospital admission. In fact, the day he would have to go to the hospital, he would end up getting a fever, probably out of the fear and anxiety. So when he made it clear he did not want any further hospital administrations, and the doctors and my mother and the family agreed, he happily said goodbye to the nurses. He even clicked a picture with the nurse, and he shook hands with all of them, and he came home. And then from then his palliative care started.
Okay. Sakshi, if we are going to discuss regarding him, and if there are some comments, I don't know whether it is going to be pain for you, because this is something personal.
It's okay, sir. We can discuss it.
Okay. So, sir, can you, if you have seen this patient, what else would you do in such situation?
Sorry, your voice is not audible.
Sir, can you hear me?
Sunil, you are talking to me?
Yes, sir.
Oh, sorry. Sakshi, you are sharing a very painful story. For our benefits, I want you to know that we appreciate that very much. This cannot be easy for you. Thank you for talking about it. And I'm glad that your grandfather had a compassionate treatment. I'm glad he was told the truth. I'm glad he could live at home and die at home. So, specifically, to try to other people are also thanking Sakshi for coming out with the story. Sakshi, if then what else could have been done? I think you will have to find the answer to that, because whatever we do, eventually the family lives with some guilt. You also, you would say, oh my God, if only I had done that or that or that happens. But what do you think were the elements of suffering that your grandfather had? When he was told the truth, diagnosis, how did he take it? How did he respond?
I don't know it too well, sir, because I was not there. I stay in Chennai. So this entire case history, my mom helped me because she was there. So there was only little that I could ask her without causing her more pain. So he was a little taken aback, but I think because the diagnosis was told to him a little late after 2 sessions, he already had a hint that there is something much more than anemia. And because he was throughout his life very healthy and free of ailments, he could make out that blood while coughing, and his sudden weight loss had something else and something more to it. And I think the only thing which gave him a lot of support, the positive of COVID, I would feel, because my grandparents stay with it's a joint family. My grandfather's one more brother, they all stayed together in Calcutta. But because of COVID, my mother was there. She was there with him for 10 days when the start happened. And when she came back was just 2 days before the lockdown happened. And my uncle, that is my grandfather's son, went to Calcutta, and he was there with him throughout till he passed. So I think in a usual circumstance, probably he would have stayed for a shorter duration, but because of COVID and because of nationwide strike, lockdown, they spent quality time with each other, and that made my grandfather really happy.
I don't know the answer to your question because they seem to have done a lot for him, given him what he wanted, and made him comfortable. And if there were problems that he still suffered from, we still do not know. But Sunil, when you asked that question, did you have some answers yourself?
No, sir, but I just wanted to express that the quality of life is something decided by each and every person. So it is important for us to ask that person what would be the quality of life that they are expecting. So maybe sometime he may not, if we have disclosed the full truth, even the prognosis may not be in terms of 2 or 3 months, not like that. But we can tell him that if you have any wishes or something which need to be done as early as possible, things like that, so that he might have some preferences. So that may be the things which will give him more comfort. But I understand that he had comfort because joint family would stay with him, and he was taken care of in a way that he wants. Um, whether blood transfusion or and things like that, if we have discussed with him, should we have avoided that or not? These all are retrospective questions, so it will be very difficult to come to a conclusion when we are during that difficult time.
I had a friend, a neighbor, elderly man with leukemia. He was the husband of one of my teachers. And was somebody speaking to me? Raju, am I audible?
Yes,
Yes,
sir. It was a disturbance in between, sir. You can continue, sir.
Okay. So what we did in the beginning was to tell him, look, I'm sorry that we cannot give you blood transfusion at home. We did not have the facility. We could not even procure the blood to be given at home. If you are willing to come to our institution, we'll give you blood transfusion without admitting you. You can come there, stay in the daycare unit or outpatient clinic somewhere, and go back home in the evening. But we also told him something else. You should also know that the only advantage of transfusion at this stage of your illness, that your tiredness will go. But you should also know that the effect will last only for 3 weeks. Any transfusion at this stage of your illness will last only for the duration of life of those red cells. So he did accept one transfusion. Thereafter, he decided no more. The in between, he was not quite sure because he was getting more and more tired. He wondered, but then he decided he doesn't want to leave home. And so, what am I saying? Even the decision on transfusion in such a situation is a joint decision. It is not you need a transfusion, go and get it done. It's not that. We are still discussing the individual autonomy is respected. And when I recommend a transfusion like that, I would put myself in the patient's shoes. Tomorrow I will be he, and what would I want? I would want that autonomy and decision making capacity, and that's what I would offer him.
okay. So what next question is regarding Sakshi, home care versus
Yes.
hospital admission. What do you want to specifically ask regarding this?
No, sir, I just wanted to say that his wishes were what he wanted. Like rather than us wanting hospital administration for him or trying to take him to a hospital for further treatment, his wishes, we went with his wish of a home palliative care. And because he said no to transfusion and getting admitted in the hospital, we gave him an option of transfusion at home, for which he agreed. So, but the only thing is, because of the COVID, the transfusion was a little late. It could not be done as early as possible, and they wanted 2-3 more days for the arrangement to be made at home. So that was my things about home and hospital care.
Sakshi, from all of us, please do one thing for us.
Yes.
Please convey to your grandmother and mother that we all have respect for them, because they really were brave enough to think of his well-being more than anything else. And it is not easy to honor his wishes and to give him respect and dignity. And you did that. They certainly have our respect.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Hey, Sunil, sorry, we still have a few minutes, I see. There was that question about death certificate. I still have not understood that question completely.
Dr. Ravindra, can you unmute and speak?
Pondicherry, death certificate is necessary from institution. Okay, Dr. Ravindra, you want to explain to us what exactly the situation is? Dr. Ravindra, maybe this is the sort of situation. One of my patients died recently. Many of our patients died recently, but recent problem is at the crematorium, they asked for a certificate, death certificate saying the cause of death. What they really want is a certificate saying that he is not dying of COVID. Because if it is COVID, they have a special protocol. So I knew that the man had advanced cancer, and what I gave is a certificate saying that his man has advanced cancer and died of his cancer. He had no symptoms suggestive of COVID-19. A COVID-19 test was not done, so I could not say that he did not have COVID, but I said that no symptoms or symptoms suggestive of COVID, and that was enough. I don't know if your question is anything like that. And I have repeatedly given this kind of personal certificates. There's a bit of an element of risk there. I'll accept that. Suppose the family had killed the man and later it came out, would I be considered an accomplice? Oh, if there is a strong possibility for you to doubt something, you should be asking for an autopsy. But when you have a person with advanced cancer or something like that, I go ahead and take that risk happily.
So, Sakshi, would you like to ask anything regarding anything from the story? Any questions more?
So I think maybe, sir, like the question the last 2 days, otherwise he was fine at the palliative care that was given at home. The last 2 days, what could have been done? Like he had difficulty in urination, and they did not take him to the doctor. They only spoke to the doctor on the phone, and he was feeling dizzy, and there was no delirium. I did ask my mother that if he had delirium. He did not have delirium, but he did feel dizzy and very weak, and difficulty in urination. But Otherwise, as such, he was fine. He was talking, and in fact, just before he passed away, he asked for some tea. He had tea, he coughed, and that's when he breathed his last. So in these 2 days, maybe for his difficulty in urination, is there anything that could have been done, sir?
We don't know what the difficulty with urination is.
Yes.
Only if he was having retention, he needed a catheterization.
Okay.
If what your family describes as difficulty in urination could be just that he was having oliguria.
Yes,
He
sir.
was and he didn't have much of urine. So in which case there would be nothing to be done about it. So it is really symptom-based treatment, and we try to identify the element of suffering, say dizziness.
Yes.
This is the time when he would have postural hypotension. If somebody is trying to sit him up, he would have it. There are some things that cannot be easily treated. Extreme exhaustion, tiredness.
Yes.
Somebody dying, that's not easily treatable. So there are, you certainly will look for correctable factors, but if there are no correctable factors, some things you will have to accept. But again, I am full of respect for you and your family. Thank you for sharing your story with us.
Thank you,
Sakshi,
sir.
were you able to advise the family members regarding the care of your grandfather?
Sir, my grandmother and my uncle were there, and so they were taking care of him. And because he was not bedridden, he could walk around a bit. He liked watching television, so whatever he liked was being done. And I don't know the much of the details because I did not ask my grandmother, sir. Like, these are the details that I got from my mother.
Okay. I just wanted to ask.
Sunil,
Yeah.
sorry. Sunil, Sakshi, everybody, there's somebody waiting for me for quite some time and they are in a bit of a hurry. So please permit me to leave. It was good to talk.
Sir, I have one question, if I can ask before you
Yeah,
leave. Yeah. My question is, apart from the ICMR guideline, is there any other legal hurdle or issue that would come to us if we push towards end of life care to be palliative and not not going to a hospital? Thank you.
Sunil, please answer the question if you can. But please, Raju, please take her email ID. And I am very happy to have an email conversation with her. Thank you. Sorry I have to leave.
Okay, sir. So are you asking if the patient is near end of life,
Yes,
if the patient comes to palliative care, do we need to face any legal issues?
Yeah.
Okay, so if the family want the palliative care, and if they are willing, we have to explain that what is palliative care, and if they accept and come, then we can provide palliative care. There is no legal issues that is going to face. Because the family is the people who are going to come up with some legal problems. Otherwise, because if the patient is near end of life, it is surely the family will be taking the patient to palliative care. So I don't think we may face some legal issues in such situation. And even when I worked in a tertiary care hospital, when the patient is in the ICU with all the support, sometimes the treating team decides that okay, this patient, even if we do aggressive treatment, there is no chance of coming from this situation. In such situation, they will ask the palliative care to take over the patient. So we will discuss with the family and what can be done in palliative care, and then we will shift the patient to palliative care, and we will do all the possible to make him comfortable. So this is practiced in many hospitals. So I don't think it will be a problem. But if you have any concerns, can you tell us?
Yeah, I think later on I can ask you in detail about it. But so far, thank you so much.
Okay. So thank you.
This is Ravindra Bharati, actually, sir.
Yeah,
RB.
yeah, yeah,
Yes. Sorry, I could not unmute myself during that time, actually. Sorry, sir.
yeah.
Sir, actually, I just wanted to know, actually, we have a patient who is a pediatrician and he's a HOD. And now at present, he's around 80 years old. He's diagnosed to have a thing, carcinoma lung. Is that right? Massive pleural effusion. And he's not willing for any tapping at present, actually. We have started on chemotherapy, but he is very thin and he is not accepting the chemotherapy. Within one episode of chemotherapy has been initiated, he had become very severe symptomatic and severe pain and all these things happening. Now at present, he is breathlessness, actually, with 10 liters of O2 at high flow oxygen he is on. He wants to go home and continue his life and rest of his life in home. So I don't know what to do. What will be the next step, actually? At present, we are giving a morphine at 10 milligram Q4 hourly because we just have a morphine at oral dose, and we also trying for a oral dose of this thing, sir. Sorry.
Okay. So the patient want to go home or family want to take him home? What is
We
the
also
situation?
have a this thing. Just we have arranged for a morphine of IV. So what will be the next line of care, sir? Actually, because he's planning for going home now at present.
Okay. So I hope the family and patient are in consent to go home, and if they are going home, just 10 liters of oxygen, even with the big cylinder, I think it will not last uh, for a day. So 10 liters of oxygen arranging at home will be very difficult.
Yes, sir.
But if they have that choice of getting frequent cylinders, then it will not be a problem. But I think if he's, I see that he he don't want any other treatment, isn't it?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Because
Steroid chemotherapy.
we also will actually accept this this thing because he's very thin. He's 6 years old. He's a HOD and pediatrics.
Yeah.
He knows what to do and what else is happening. Everything. Yes, sir.
Okay. So if his breathlessness is not relieved with morphine, you can increase the morphine little bit more. But if that is also not going to help him, then I think ask him whether he would like to sleep rather than awaken with breathlessness. And
Yes,
if
sir.
he says, yes, I would like to sleep more, then I would like to awake, then
Yes.
I think you can sedate the patient with benzodiazepines like midazolam, with a short acting, but it should be a continuous infusion. But you can ask him when would he like to sleep? Is it during night or continuously he want to sleep? And you can give a continuous infusion of midazolam along with morphine. But midazolam can also make some excitement and can cause delirium if it is given along with morphine. So it would be better to add some haloperidol along with it.
Yes, sir. Because we have initiated on lorazepam actually. 2
Okay,
milligram Q8 hourly we have added with
okay.
He's sleeping on and off and he's getting up and talking like he's talking, sir. But he
Yeah.
knows what to do and he is fully aware of what is happening. He
Yeah,
just says, it's okay for me. I have lived my life and all these things. But you know, like he's a doctor and
yeah,
these are all doctors actually. They are all they all came here. They all we are making the family very comfortable with 3 sons with them and wife, everyone with them. he wants to go home and live his life actually.
Yeah.
So even a
I
Pondicherry.
think, yeah, I
I-
think we have to respect his wish because he is a fully informed person as he is a doctor,
Yes, sir.
and he know all the things what can occur, and even you can discuss with him, and then you can if it is possible for them to do continuous infusion, then that can be done. Otherwise, as you told, maybe oral lorazepam can be given. And if there is sudden acute attack of anxiety or breathlessness, SOS dose of morphine along with sublingual lorazepam. The same lorazepam can be given sublingually, which will act very fast.
Yes, sir.
Oral lorazepam will take some time to act. So that can be done.
And one more question, sir, actually. Sorry,
Yeah.
sir. Yes, sir. Actually, we live in a small union territory, actually, where without a death certificate, we cannot be cremated, actually. So for burial or something else, we need a death certificate. Our institute is not allowing to give a birth certificate outside our hospital. So what can I do for this patient, sir?
Yeah. So this is a difficult situation.
Yes.
Even in normal times, this will be difficult. But I think, are there any doctors in the family?
There are 3 doctors, sir, actually. They're all like practicing outside, abroad, sir.
Okay. So maybe if I think there would be some doctor in his locality, and once he is discharged from the hospital, I think you can contact with one of the doctor who is in the locality,
Yes, sir.
who will be knowing this pediatrician because he is HOD. So maybe the family can go and talk to the local doctor and tell him there is a problem like this, and we are going to take this person to home. And if anything happens, I think it will be better if he can come to see him once, and maybe after that we can take the help of this doctor.
Yes, sir.
That's
Sir,
what we can.
if it is so, what will be the cause of death, sir, actually, in this patient? How can we write it, actually? What is the cause of death?
What is the diagnosis? What malignancy?
Carcinoma lung, sir.
Yeah.
Old cell carcinoma lung, small cell carcinoma.
So it would be carcinoma lung.
Okay, sir. With all comorbidities.
I think carcinoma lung itself is that's the primary cause of death. So if you look at the death informing form,
Yes.
there are 3 headings. One is primary cause of death,
Yes,
and
primary
what are
cause
the
of death.
comorbidities, etc. But I think primary cause would be enough.
Yes, sir. Sure,
Okay.
sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
So thank you.
Sir, actually, I just wanted to thank you so much, actually, because after joining this care only, I started doing my palliative service, actually, and following this is my first case. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Rajagopal, sir. Thank you, Sunil.